Sometimes a single decision, just one order, can send shockwaves through an entire system. Today, we're diving into testimony from the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry that really pulls back the curtain on a massive failure inside the South African Police Service. And it all starts with a sudden shutdown of a really important task team. Okay, let's get into it. Now, everything we're about to cover, this isn't just speculation or rumor. This is all grounded in sworn testimony from these official proceedings. We're getting a look at the actual gears of the justice system and what happens when they just grind to a halt. So here's how we're going to break this story down. First, the initial shock. Then we'll look at the bizarre procedures they followed. After that, we track the absolute chaos of 121 murder dockets, see how leadership completely broke down, and finally, we'll talk about the real-world consequences of it all. Okay, so our story really begins with something called the Political Killings Task Team, or the PKTT. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill unit. It was actually seen as a huge success, tackling some of the most sensitive and dangerous crimes in the country. And look, this isn't just an opinion from some low-level officer. This is the sworn testimony of a top police general. She's on record saying the PKT wasn't just working, it was a model of best practice. The conversation should have been about giving them more resources, not shutting them down. And then this happens. On New Year's Eve of all days, an order comes down from the very top. Shut it down. Immediately. No transition period, no winding down, just stop. This one directive is the bombshell that kicks this whole story off. So how does a bombshell like that even get dropped? Well, it turns out it wasn't just what happened, but how it happened that just defied all logic. The way this order was carried out was, to put it mildly, not normal at all. Business unusual. Those are the general's own words. See, normally, a huge decision like this would involve meetings, assessments, and definitely talking to key leaders, like the provincial commissioner, General Muwazi. But none of that happened. He was kept completely in the dark. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. On the left, you've got the standard, logical, by-the-book process. On the right, you see what actually happened with the PKTT. No assessment, no one was consulted, no plan. It was a total break from how things are supposed to be done. And here's the kicker, the part that makes you just scratch your head. The Minister of Police was new to the job, still in what they called an orientation phase. So how does someone that new make such a massive unilateral decision without getting advice from the commanders on the ground? It's the huge question mark hanging over this whole thing. Now, this isn't just about paperwork and procedures. This decision had very real, very physical consequences. It threw hundreds of active murder and robbery investigations into total chaos. 121. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's 121 dockets for politically sensitive cases. 121 sets of victims and families, all waiting for justice, suddenly caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. I mean, just follow this chaotic journey. First, under a ton of political pressure, this haste handover is ordered. The dockets are physically driven hundreds of kilometers to Pretoria. It's only then that they finally call the provincial commissioner, the one person who should have been consulted from the start. And what's his reaction? He flat out refuses to take them. So they're just left to gather dust at head office for months. So why were they even moved in the first place? Well, the official story from one general was that it was for an audit. But General Mavana's testimony completely blows that out of the water. She says, audits are done locally, at police stations. She was crystal clear. This was a rushed handover, not some routine audit. The story just doesn't add up. And this right here, this is the moment that chain of command completely snaps. Can you imagine being the general responsible for these cases and hearing that from the provincial commissioner? It's a total standoff, and the only casualty is justice. So what we're seeing isn't just a procedural failure. It's a deeply human one. The highest levels of police leadership were totally gridlocked. They were paralyzed by confusion, pressure, and a complete lack of planning. You can just feel the pressure building when you look at this timeline. After weeks of back and forth, the leadership gets chewed out by the minister for taking too long. And what happens the very next day? Boom, that rushed, doomed handover in Pretoria. It wasn't a strategic plan. It was a panicked reaction. So when the provincial commissioner said no, the whole operation just stopped. And why? Because there was no plan B. Nobody in leadership had bothered to ask the simple question, hey,
What if he says no? The result was total paralysis. The investigations just died on the vine.
So what happens when General Mavena takes this massive problem all the way to the top, to the national commissioner? What's the response from the top cop in the country? Essentially, that's not my problem, talk to your boss. The responsibility just gets deflected right back down the chain, leaving a total leadership vacuum. No one was in charge.
Let's be really clear about what all this internal chaos actually means. It had absolutely devastating consequences for real people and for the very foundation of our justice system.
General Mavena used this really powerful term, secondary victimization. It's what happens when you disrupt a case like this. You force victims or their families to retell the most traumatic stories of their lives to strangers over and over again. You're not just delaying justice, you are actively causing more pain. And the ripple effects were just enormous. You've got active murder cases stalling out, prosecutors are left completely in the dark, public trust in the police shattered, and relationships within the police leadership itself were broken. It was this cascade of failure, all stemming from that one business unusual decision. And in the end, it all came down to this incredibly powerful exchange. The commissioner tells the police leadership, "You let the victims down. You should apologize to the nation." And General Mavena's response was simple and just devastating. "I totally agree with you. We do owe this nation an apology." What this whole episode shows us is a system so fragile that one order, issued without a plan or consultation, could bring a vital part of the justice system to its knees. And it leaves us with this one critical question. When a system is broken by a single decision, who is left to pick up the pieces?